I remembered black skies, the lightning all around me.
What's up folks, my name is Sir Medieval and today we're going to be talking about some more Kingdom Under Fire 2. Recently the game has been released on Steam alongside its Gameforge launch, and although it had a rocky start with the masses, it appears to be making a comeback in the reviews. Now so far, the game has been off to a decent start once in-game begins. A good number of players from the community felt that the leveling process from 1 to 30 did not feel like it was one of the best aspects of the game. In fact, it was described as one of the worst parts. For me personally, I would have to say that although the open world MMORPG aspect was appreciated, I think the main issue lies in how it doesn't really offer enough to feel engaging during and after the fact. I think starting off with something as simple as implementing dynamic events into the open world zones that players can level through and earn rewards with other players would be a great start to improving them. And when it comes to after the end game, being able to come back to these zones to somehow grind for money would also be a great way to promote returning to them, whether it's trash items we can sell to the vendors or flat gold we can get through grinding mobs. But I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves, so first I'd like to say that overall, Kingdom Under Fire 2 has been a good experience, and I felt that more truly than most MMORPGs that have released in the past few years. But even so, there is always of course room for improvement. This video will be directed towards Blueside, the developers of Kingdom Under Fire 2, in the hopes that they may get a clear understanding of how the player base feels about the game right now. A few days ago I posted a Reddit thread in response to Gameforge's recent community talks video, and in this thread I talk about some of the glaring issues I've noticed during my time in the game, and also invited players to come forth with what they feel needs improvement to make the game be able to stand on its own with all the rest. And that's exactly what we'll be discussing in this video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First, let's start with the loot system. The loot system in the current Kingdom Under Fire 2 games is one that I believe to be in its early stages, still untested, and a result of them attempting to change the model of gameplay from previous versions. Right now it's very easy to feel the struggle with Kingdom Under Fire 2's loot system, because although the gearing aspect feels easy enough, since you're able to craft your way up to max level gear very quickly, the troop aspect of it, the gear loot, and the gold gain is where the system really starts to fall short. For example, you may notice that in other MMOs when you are experiencing raids or just even normal content, despite always having that slight feeling of random luck in MMOs like it's always been, you still feel in some way that you're being rewarded based on the difficulty of the content you complete and how much you put in the game. Some games may even incorporate individual loot so that everybody still gets something out of the content they participate in, even if they don't get what they really want. Or some even fairly distribute loot based on how many players are undergoing the content. But over the past few years, another spectrum was born, one that's been stretched out into the field beyond anything you could imagine, and that's the massive grind casino loot system. Most games that have come from the eastern region have been branded under this type of loot, where you would endlessly spend your days doing weeklies, dailies, and other content that you may or may not have done in previous games. But for some reason it no longer felt like those games you used to love and enjoy, but instead felt more like a part-time job or a full-time job. And of course it could also be that some of us have just been playing these types of games for longer, and over time it just starts to feel more like work than fun, and that could very well be valid. But for some reason it feels like to me, those who create these games may have forgotten what made the older games more enjoyable. Or they could also be hoping to implement a huge grind to give them time to improve the game. Either way, it appears that Kingdom Under Fire does implement this type of system as well. When you get to endgame, you'll notice that most of the content that opens up requires groups. You'll be able to engage in what's called invasions, and more notably raids alongside a few other activities. Those are pretty enjoyable pieces of content, both offering mechanics that provide a challenge, at least when you're first experiencing them, and having that action-based experience that allows you to feel engaged while you're completing it. Unfortunately though, the part where it starts to take a nosedive is during the looting phase, mainly because right now it feels like there's not enough of it for all the endgame content that we have. And this is taking into consideration how much grind we'll have to go through for us to progress our characters. For example, getting a purple unit from star rank 1 to 5 would cost around 3.7 million gold per unit, not counting the vision stones. Recently I had put out the first video of my Kingdom Under Fire 2 guide series, and in it we go a little bit into detail about what the vision stones are. Essentially they are a token you can earn from raids, invasions, the troop coin vendor, and other methods that allow you to upgrade your troops alongside spending gold. When you start getting to ranks 3 and 4, you will have to include insignias for upgrading past those points. And the reason this topic is important is because for purple units you have to use more specialized vision stones as opposed to blue ones. And the way you get these, or at least the main way as of recording this video, is through cracked missions. Aside from the serial arsonists which come from PvP that I now finally have, there is a vendor in town that allows you to spend the crack shards you've earned in these missions to purchase vision stones. You can of course also grind them during your time in invasions and raids, but the loot you get from these and in general is not enough to supplement how much grind we have to put in. For invasions, your common day of loot will usually consist of one chance of getting a troop or maybe a few vision stones, one random piece of gear, and some insignia shards plus dark stones. Right now the market is currently crashed for selling both moonstones and dark stones that you get from these types of missions, and aside from crack missions, it's pretty much the main way aside from questing that players get the majority of their money right now. This creates a bit of an issue where players have to take drastic measures to earn money, like grinding crack missions for 12 to 15 hours a day to stay on top. Even though you can only earn up to 100 shards a day for purchasing vision stones, you can still earn the gold rewards from completing missions up to an endless amount. And we'll touch on this further in the future, but it's for this reason I do believe the game would do good to have more ways of earning money, whether it's some sort of mission you can run in the future, or a few of them. Dynamic events that may encourage players to come back to the open world zones we spoke about earlier, or even trash-based items you could get from mob drops and also the raids themselves to be able to earn enough money to keep up with the content itself. Especially because I have heard that there will be 45 units coming in the future, alongside new classes that we may need to obtain more troops on. How this ties into the loot issue is that alongside the market problems and low drop rate from the invasions, the raids also do not feel like they give a proper enough reward for the people you have to bring along. For instance, Rebel Fortress is probably a raid that takes about 10 to 15 minutes max, which is surprising enough in itself, but for 8 people you may see one gear piece drop, one troop or a few vision stones drop, and so on and so forth compared to the invasions. You also do get to pick rewards from the cards that populate at the end of missions, and they may have a chance of providing you with the gear piece or vision stones as well. But overall, after a few days of doing the content, you'll start to notice that having to roll against 7 other people for how little amount of loot we get may start to feel like it's not worth it. I suggested that to improve this, maybe the system could be tweaked to where you had a chance of getting 2 to 3 troop drops from a raid or vision stones in their place, with 2 gear pieces instead of 1 just being there commonly. For invasions, that could potentially be up for debate since it's only 4 people, but there's always room for improvement either way. This is in addition to the gold gain idea if it's considered, and would be a great way to help the flow of progression feel more meaningful as the game goes on. And when 16-man raids arrive, I would also hope that they too have a fair balance in terms of loot and money gain, but we'll have to see what the developers decide to do in that regard. For the next topic I suggested, we went into detail about the troop balance, which for this one, there isn't a whole lot to say because for the factions of humans, elves, and dark elves, they seem to be as close to balanced as possible aside from maybe a few exceptions. However, there is an issue with heavy infantry across the board, but the one that definitely needs some real lovin' is the orcs. And starting off with their infantry, they have some of the most squishy frontline units I've seen thus far, mainly speaking about the armor worshippers, brawlers, and ogres on this one, especially ogres. Fighters are the ones I've seen the best results with so far, although they do suffer from the same issue that most heavy infantry do, where you'll constantly have to upkeep their heals. Slaughterers are of course very useful in most situations including boss fights, and scorpions are a definite must in most content, so it's not all bad by any means. But I do think personally that this faction will need some tweaking. The ogres are basically pincushions that no one really brings to fights. They are probably the one that needs a buff the most. For armored beetles, I've started to bring them along occasionally, but mostly just for fun. I'm hoping that at least some of these troops get a touch up so that we can enjoy them, since the majority of troops are unavailable to get at the moment by regular means. The third suggestion we went over was related to patch notes and a roadmap. I know that we've seen community members recently discussing the roadmap, and there was a lot of discussion that sparked because of it, and I can understand if we're not able to get a roadmap this early into launch, even though I'd really want it too. But I do feel like if we're able to get some sort of detailed patch notes or continue that trend, that would help a lot with making players feel more comfortable with the game. Whether it's changes to PvP that will prepare people to experience it in a different way, or a slice of new content that we can be excited to enjoy, patch notes are of course always important. For the roadmap side of things, it would be great if we received some understanding on how the future would look, which classes were planned, which raids were coming, and when or in what order content was planning to be implemented. It gives players a lot to hope for, and in a lot of cases keeps them going until their content arrives. It can also be very good for maintaining a healthy game. However, some of the replies back to the queries of the roadmap today were very understandable. For instance, it was mentioned that although while doing a roadmap may be very good for the community, if deadlines end up not being met, it could be detrimental in the long run. I totally get it, but I still hope we get that kind of thing at some point, even if it's just concept art from time to time and a little, this is what they're working on and we'll notify you when it's almost ready. Stuff like that. Maybe even doing some type of podcast, videos, or live streams to showcase the current progress or upcoming content. And this of course ties into the next and last major suggestion that I provided, the advertising. For this portion, I talked about, although it was great to see so many people coming to cover the game, whether it be through streams or recorded videos, when it comes to the game itself and player base, I believe that what the community would really enjoy to see are things like social media posts, concept art, design videos, etc. Like we talked about previously, things that would showcase what they're working on or what's to come. One thing we also talked about is how it would be great if there was a staff or community manager that was in charge of this kind of stuff. Would go a long way if the game wants to survive and thrive for years to come. But after that, the thread had been opened up to the floor. From this point onward, we'll be going into responses from the community that had suggestions and what type of suggestions they had come up with as well. The first one starts off with Veldemus. He adds to the loot system topic by going into detail about the current system of endgame, stating that not only do you have to pray to the RNG gods for the things you want to drop, you then also have to roll against 7 other players to get said thing. They then say that they believe that no one wants that, not even a little bit. Noob Sabbatical then agrees about the struggle of the loot system, while adding their story related to the Darkstones and including a brief description of the Rebel Fortress experience. Which, to add on to that a little bit, even though Rebel Fortress can be overcome strategic-wise, I do think it may be a better idea if the players were able to manually select when they wanted the ram to move, or if there was some sort of timer that could be shown and each ram having about 60 seconds to 2 minutes cooldown in between each move. This may of course also require time to be extended a bit, but I do think it would make it a little bit more possible for those that want to try it a different way. Continuing on, we have Ogre Fiend, who suggested that they reintroduce the evolution mechanic, allowing us to upgrade gray troops to blue to finally purple, stating that otherwise there's no point in keeping them, which I'm sure many can attest to unless it's a decent blue unit. One other thing they mentioned was also having more gold earning methods would be great, alongside more unit gaining options. Right now there seems to be a few units we can't even obtain through traditional means, so I do hope the same thing becomes available at least with or before we get those 45 new units being talked about currently. The final thing they say, to quote them directly, is up yo drop rates. Next we have Ursival, going into the enemy hero bosses being too tanky currently. They feel that by design the troop selection by the player should reward them for countering enemy forces. However, this does not extend to enemy heroes due to their high HP and resilient defense values. They state that frankly, it is both tedious and boring to spend 10 to 15 minutes whittling down Talisman's health in the Tomb of the Dragons for the daily, and acts as a strong deterrent for completing them. Me personally, I usually go in there solo and Talisman takes me a little while, which is to be expected, but what I will say is that Scorpions in the crack missions on level 3 are definitely more aggravating than fun to take down. It feels like it takes forever, and that's exactly why that mission and a few others are why I would not want to do crack missions all day for about 14 hours a day. Subari also gave a lot of feedback on this subject, and also, thank you very much for the support, it is highly appreciated. They believe that a huge issue is that the game was designed with free-to-play in mind, and we are currently missing all the features that past versions had to grind out higher units. They feel that the publisher and developers seem to shy away from answering the community's questions that have already bought the game, and instead are too focused on potential customers. With Subari and everyone past this point with a lot of great feedback, I'm going to go ahead and list out their suggestions one by one while briefly touching on each of them. For their first suggestion, they suggest having a weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly video answering questions. The second would be more transparency of what we can expect content-wise that has already been in previous versions. Third would be weekend events such as double event gold drops from Cracked or double unit experience, stating that it helps the community focus in one area for a short amount of time. Number 4 would also be to add small coin drops to mobs and field zones, along with crafting materials on a more frequent basis. Number 5 is to have players drop PvP tokens in the wilderness, with 6 being to add more variety into crack missions. There's so many different levels in the game, for the only 4 that we have it begins to get pretty old quickly. The rest of their feedback goes into several key aspects that I highly recommend taking a look into in full. As stated before, I'll be linking the Reddit thread in the description below, so be sure to check it out. Also, speaking of great feedback, Mafun Mon had agreed that, like Subari, a survival mode would be great for providing endless hours to players that simply want to hop in, engage in combat for a while, and then continue on with their day. James C. Stars would also like to suggest a basic option for inverting Y and X axis. I've also personally seen players talk about they wish controller support was a thing, but of course that might be something we have to wait on closer to a possible console release if that route is taken. The Freezer 700 provides some great feedback as well related to the storyline. They believe one big issue is the storyline itself. Why are the Inkablosians here, for instance? Why are the orcs aiding them? and why are Dark Elves being ruled by humans? They also present some details about previous Kingdom Under Fire games and how they feel ultimately detached with what is presented in Kingdom Under Fire 2. They also talk about how they do make lore videos on Kingdom Under Fire and still play the old games to stay familiar with them. I think you should 100% check that out if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, and I wholeheartedly think this is something that should be considered going forward. Sometimes games and developers brush storylines aside in favor of chasing and making good gameplay and every other aspect. But when it comes down to it, sometimes the game itself could have the storyline be one of its main focuses and be extremely successful because of that. I can think of 2 examples off the top of my head that I'm sure appeal to a lot of its players largely because of the story they built over the years. The 5_4 states for his that perhaps an in-game wiki would help with learning things about the game, which I could see being needed because for a new player, I'm sure it could be quite overwhelming coming into the game for the first time and seeing all those different systems at once, especially for those who like to seek outside help and be prepared before they jump into a title in this genre. DM_Hammer also presents several questions related to the discussed topics as well. The first being that they wonder if any other troops besides purple are worth long term. They wonder if there's any reason to rank/level other units because the purple simply outperform the blue and grays. Which I would say the only reason you'd probably have a blue troop is if you don't already have the purple variant or you want to bring 2 of the same type of unit into battle. A blue slaughterer and a purple slaughterer might be possible for instance, but other than that, I think it ties back to the evolution system suggestion. I think that something like that or the heroic troop vendors would need to be implemented for them to feel truly worth it. They also continue by pointing out that as discussed, despite the troop vendor, a lot of units you really want are simply not obtainable at the moment aside from maybe RNG and dedicating. And that subjugations feel more like a bad lottery ticket than a fun activity you can engage in and a chance for troops. Also speaking on the troop balance, they provided an example between Dark Elf Infantry, Longswordmen, and Slaughterers saying that the gap between them gets pretty massive in performance. They also speak about the gold income and pricing, providing feedback on the translation and voice acting issues in game, alongside subjugation missions, boss enemy health, and the end of mission card rewards, suggesting that instead of the current process, maybe we could be given the chance to pick between 2 cards and see the rewards before deciding on a final. I do think that although it makes it easier for us, it will certainly give us more hope for feeling rewarded at the end of missions since the cards themselves popping up is a guarantee. Aside from that, you've got a lot more great feedback coming from the community and I think that it will only grow as time goes on. I personally believe that everybody has done an amazing job at putting forth their thoughts about the game. All I'm seeing is a bunch of players that are passionate about the game and really want it to succeed. And I truly hope that the companies do take notice. That's going to be all for now and I thank you very much for watching. Be sure to check out the thread for the rest of the feedback and to add your own to put forth your suggestions to the developers any way you can. Every piece of feedback to further the game's future counts. Have a good holiday this year and I'll catch you for the next one. Farewell.